We like Darkwing Duck because they have no bones.
I am the Joe Getcho that flaps in the night.
And I am the Mike White, and this is the podcast We Like Comics because they have no bones. Find us on social media at Boneless Comics Podcast or on X at Boneless Comics 1.
That's right. We are a clean comic book podcast where we chat about comics from Marvel, DC, IDW, Dark Horse, Image, and more. Also, Dynamite comics. Find extra content on bonelesscomicspodcast.com and look for our after shows and bonus content on our YouTube channel at Boneless Comics Podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe and click the notification bell to get updates.
That's right. And if you're interested in more bonus content, let us know in the comments on YouTube. We have plenty of cool extras like Spidey Joe's one-shots, additional reviews, and even a tour of some of our comic memorabilia from over the years. Also, if you'd be interested in more YouTube shorts with comic trivia, let us know in the comments. So my artwork for today is Darkwing Duck, fittingly, and Quackerjack's friend and ventriloquist dummy, Mr. Banana Brain, who I was amazed and thrilled to find out was a character before I did the art. So you can view that as part of our video podcast on YouTube.
That's right. Well, let's get into our review of Darkwing Duck Foul Play, written by Amanda Deibert with pencils, inks, and colors by Carlo Lauro. Is that Lauro?
I was saying Lauro, but I'm not Italian, so I don't know.
All right. Well, it collects Darkwing Duck issues 1 through 6, published in 2023 by Dynamite Comics. As this is a very recent book, once again, our episode will be very spoiler-heavy once again. So you have been warned. You should wait to listen to this episode afterwards if you plan to read this comic, because we will spoil it for you. We're going to spoil this for you, just so you know.
That's right.
Let's get dangerous.
So our characters for today, if you're not familiar, are Darkwing Duck, or civilian name Drake Mallard. He is our hero, the dramatic and overconfident protector of the city of St. Canard. And he's an urban vigilante like Batman or Spider-Man, but he's clearly based more on the former. He fights evil using his gas gun, which doubles as a grappling hook, and actually all kinds of other gadgets, and his detective skills. And his ego often leads to hilarious mishaps, but he does genuinely care about St. Canard and his family. So speaking of his, I guess, kind of his family, we have Launchpad McQuack, who's Darkwing's loyal and clumsy sidekick. Launchpad actually originated in the DuckTales animated series. So he was Darkwing's biggest fan, however.
A fan? Really? I mean, really?
And so Launchpad kind of like strong-armed his way into becoming his sidekick, somewhat against his will.
I don't need a sidekick.
Yeah, exactly. I think most of the first episode he's giving him like the, I work alone.
I work alone.
But I can be your sidekick.
Singing cowboys have sidekicks. I rely on me. Nobody but me. Got that?
Yeah.
However, when Launchpad unveiled the Thunderquack, Darkwing's airplane, he won the hero over.
I call it the Thunderquack.
I call it sensational. We're gonna bring Boba down like a ton of bricks. Sidekick.
Yeah!
And he's been his pilot and sidekick ever since. And if you don't know, Launchpad is an amazing pilot, but he really sucks at landing. So that's the thing that we always worry about, is like, how are we going to get down?
Also, the Thunderquack is literally in the shape of Darkwing's head.
I love this. It even looks like me.
So that's why he was able to win him over, because Darkwing's ego is out of control.
Your ego is out of control, isn't it?
What?
And so Launchpad making a jet that looks like his face, it was like, well, perfect.
If you can tell, we've seen these episodes a few times.
Phew.
So we also have Gosselin Mallard. She was born Gosselin Waddlemeyer, but she is Darkwing's energetic and spirited adopted daughter. And that word spirit is very important, because everybody always said that she had spirit.
Spirit? Thanks, Darkwing.
So she is athletic and extremely competitive, and Gosselin often fights crime alongside her father, even though he really doesn't want her to do that.
But it's a good thing she does, because she often saves his life.
Yeah,
so
she does. There's a lot of times where Gosselin's the reason that they succeed, actually.
Yeah.
We also have Honker Muddlefoot. He's Gosalyn's next door neighbor and best friend. And Honker is a nerdy, well-behaved kid that often gets mixed up in Gosalyn's shenanigans. Now we move on to the villains, which they are organized a lot of the time. So the evil organization is called F.O.W.L, or the Fiendish Organization for World Larceny.
I wouldn't know the first place to look for chickens.
No, not foul. F.O.W.L, the Foreign Organization for World Larceny.
A global crime syndicate and terrorist organization. They're bent on world domination and profit. And their rival heroic organization is Shush. But actually, they're so secretive that you never find out what that acronym stands for. And you can kind of think of F.O.W.L as like AIM from Marvel Comics, and Shush is basically S.H.I.E.L.D.
Right.
So that's kind of like the analog and regular.
And foul is a play on words because they're evil, so they're foul like F-O-U-L, but it's F-O-W-L like...
Right.
Like birds?
Like waterfowl.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
so, and then the acronym is, we're a fiendish organization and world larceny, so they want to take over the world as most evil organizations do, because why not?
right. Yeah, I mean, making money and taking over the world is what it's all about.
Yeah, of course.
obviously.
That's why we
So-
started this podcast.
So we...
Try to take over the world.
That's
No.
another 90s cartoon.
And the National American Ratified...
We need to find that episode of Pinky and the Brain.
We do.
And play it at some point. So members of F.O.W.L, that they're not necessarily always organized, but in this comic we kind of find out that they're working together. First we have Quackerjack. He's the former owner of a toy company that went under due to the rise of video games. So because of this, he goes mad and decides to continue his company outside the rules of the toy industry. Quackerjack cares about making money first, then bringing back his toy brand, and then destroying video games once and for all. So he would be one of our biggest villains because that would not be okay.
He's like an evil mad scientist that's about toys and video games.
Right.
So sort of like the Toy Maker or any
Yeah.
of those type of villains. But he's also dressed like a court jester, and he's got the big hat with the little bells hanging from the hat and all kinds of stuff.
He kind of has like almost like a Harley Quinn or Joker vibe to him
Yeah.
visually, but as far as what his gimmicks actually are, he's probably closer to like
the Joker?
I would say Toyman and Superman, or what's that Flash villain that has all the traps? It's like Trickster or something like that. It kind of close to that guy too.
Okay.
So we also have Bushroot, and his name is literally Reginald Bushroot. He is a botanist who became a half-plant, half-duck mutant due to a failed experiment. And he's extremely sensitive, so he often lashes out at people with his plant-based powers. And he's really trying to be... He's, like, really lonely, so the plants, like, became his friends, basically, and that's kind of his whole deal. We also have Liquidator, the Liquidator!
The Liquidator brand! Yep.
That's right. So Bud Flood is the hydrokinetic villain known as the Liquidator. His body is composed entirely of water, and he can shapeshift, control his own density, and manipulate any nearby water at will. And so he was like a bottled water salesman before he became the Liquidator, and was in this horrible accident with... I think he was actually pouring unstable chemicals into competitors' water so that he could win, but then he got exposed to them and they changed him into the Liquidator.
Yes.
So he always has kind of like this sales pitch sort of attitude, like he's making an advertisement for himself whenever he shows up. So he's kind of a fun character.
And he's a dog person.
He is
like,
a dog person.
Like not a person who's comfortable around dogs, but literally
Exactly.
a dog who is a person.
Yeah, like Goofy, you know,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
somebody like that. So
It is
then,
Goofy.
then we have then we have Megavolt, who is, I think, a rat. I believe he's a rat because he has whiskers at least. Megavolt is Elmo Sputterspark, and he has the ability to control and channel electricity, as well as having a few screws loose. So the accident that gave him his abilities granted him nearly unlimited power, but also a rare form of psychosis. Megavolt believes toasters and other appliances powered by electricity need to be freed from their servitude, and his insanity even goes so far as romantic interest in things like hadron colliders. So he's really out there.
Yeah.
Like, he's really crazy.
He's a few volts short of a circuit or
Exactly.
something.
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah.
Couldn't have put it better myself. So then our final antagonist that we have is Dr. No Good. I didn't know this guy before this story, so I did research. Apparently, he's an antagonist that appeared in one episode of DuckTales, not Darkwing Duck. And he's a parody of the James Bond villain Dr. No. So, Dr. No, Dr. No Good.
And Dr. No Good is up to no good.
Oh, it feels so good to be no good.
He was actually connected to F.O.W.L in that episode.
Oh, wow.
So, I think that these shows were like running concurrently for a while, and maybe they had some crossover that way. So, yeah, Negaduck is also in the story, but we really don't do a whole lot with him, so I'm not going to do a bio on him. But those are pretty much the characters you need to know about in our story today.
All right. So our story today is actually a collection of kind of short stories with a little bit of thread going through. So I wanted to quickly summarize each one to give you some context to know what we're talking about, because we're going to make so many jokes and references to the animated series. And if you haven't seen that, you'll probably be very lost. So at least we can explain the comic to you, and that will help. So this is, again, definitely a part where there's going to be a lot of spoilers. Just so you know.
Spoiler alert.
So issue 1 begins with the unveiling of a statue in honor of Darkwing Duck, which that will feed his ego for years to come. But as part of the ceremony, they're going to hear personal experiences from all the citizens that were saved by him. And of course, the first one to go is his dorky neighbor, Herb Muddlefoot, who has some embarrassing stories to tell about Darkwing, not heroic ones. But fortunately, at least for Darkwing, this is interrupted by Megavolt, who is able to hypnotize the entire crowd using their cell phones. So this is definitely a much more modern take than the animated series, which came out in the 90s. So now that we're getting the story in 2023, we've got a little bit of modernization with cell phones. That's cool. But, now people are being hypnotized by them, except for Goslin and Honker, who don't have cell phones. So they are not affected, and they're not allowed, or at least Goslin's not allowed to have a cell phone because of Darkwing's whatever his personal preferences
his
against
middle-aged boomer personality.
Exactly. So anyway, Honker and Goslin go to generate an electrical surge using guitars and amps to, make a lot of rock music and noise to attract Megavolt. And apparently they have to wear costumes too, because, it's part of the thing that you have to dress up while you're, trying to save your friends and stuff like that. So anyway, Megavolt subdues them, but Darkwing comes in and saves the day by interrupting the electrical signal with his body. But he survives, and he's totally fine, and emerges victorious with a reminder, and that is why you can't have a cell phone. And that's issue 1. Issue 2, Drake Mallard, who is Darkwing's alter ego, takes his daughter Goslin to the toy store. What could go wrong? Well, if you remember from the character descriptions, there is a toy-themed villain that Darkwing knows about, but of course falls right into the trap of a huge stack of Darkwing Duck toys that are actually the mechanical minions of Quackerjack, the toy-related villain. So he quickly slips into a telephone booth, because there's one apparently in this store.
Minor correction. It was a photo booth, wasn't it?
Oh,
because and the reason I remember that is because
he took pictures.
He takes pictures of himself while he's changing into his superhero persona.
Yeah, so he changes into Darkwing Duck, and most of the issue is him battling against Quackerjack's army of toys. It's pretty funny. There's a bunch of teddy bears. Their stuffing is like all everywhere. There's a bunch of creepy dolls. There's a sea of rubber duckies. I mean, it's crazy. But Darkwing figures out that, after Goslin is almost drowned in a sea of rubber duckies, he finally instantly knows what to do to save the day, which is kicking open the front door of the store and letting the avalanche of duckies pour out of the store into a fountain across the street, and the water apparently just subdues Quackerjack and Mr. Banana Brain, and they're unable to fight any further. That and the thing that Darkwing places Quackerjack in, which he says is part life preserver, part full body cuffs. So then the sea of rubber duckies, since they're just all over the street, they get rescued by Drake's neighbor Herb, who's president of St. Canard's Bubble Bath Appreciation Society, and so he can put these to good use. Of course. So it has a
course.
happy ending. But
a lot of logic there.
yes, exactly. But this one has a twist. At the end, Drake Mallard says he wants to hang up his cape and cowl to focus on fatherhood, and he's going to fund it with the Quacker babies he invested in way back in the 1990s. So we get a little bit here to kind of date this to say that, you know, he was much younger in the 90s, but we're definitely, you know, in more modern times, because he actually does say that he's like 35-ish at some point. So that kind of dates him a little bit.
And obviously, Quacker babies are Beanie Babies within the Duckverse.
Right. So then issue 3, Drake Mallard and his family are camping in the woods while the Darkwing symbol, which is literally just, you know, a shadow of his profile, is projected into the night sky, but he's not there to answer because he's hung up his cape. And he's taking his family camping. Well, he's camping in Morgana's backyard, basically, and is it Moleculo. So Moleculo has employed Launchpad because he needed a new sidekick gig since Drake gave up the hero game. So Moleculo has employed Launchpad, and Moleculo is Morgana's father. So there's this whole, you know, drama that kind of starts up from there.
I guess I should have explained Morgana now that I think about it. But she's basically Darkwing's on-again, off-again love interest, and she has magical abilities. Basically, think of like Zatanna from DC Comics. That's pretty much who she is. So, but
Yeah.
you know, as a duck.
But she kind of reminds me more of like she's come out of the Addams family.
Yeah,
because of the
she
way
has
that
that
she's
vibe,
dressed
too.
and the way that she cooks food that has like bats and spiders and stuff in it.
Yeah, that's true. She does have a Morticia vibe to
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, Darkwing and his family get kicked off the property because they're Moleculo and Launchpad are cleaning up monsters because, you know, sometimes monsters run loose in the wild and you gotta catch them. So naturally, Drake, I should say, not Darkwing, because he's given up his cape and cowl. The team encounter a ghost. So even though he's no longer Darkwing, he packed his gas gun, which suddenly in the next panel transforms into a proton pack from Ghostbusters that will allow him to trap the ghost. Except somehow he ends up getting trapped inside the ghost, and that's when Morgana shows up to rescue him from, it's actually her cousin Geordie. So, you know, no need to be scared, even though it's just a ghost. So Drake asks Morgana, hey, you know, can you... I'm hanging up my superhero identity and I'm just going to live the suburban life. Why don't you leave Macabre Manor, and come enjoy the retired life as part of the family? So Morgana does, and so we see her cooking ghoul ash for breakfast. But then Drake's like, no, I've got breakfast under control. After all, you know his motto, stay sharp, stay fit, stay fed. Boing!
Alrighty, stay sharp, stay fit, stay fed.
And he hits the timer, and we get a call back to the first episode of the animated series where making breakfast is this obstacle course where the silverware is like flying at you and you got to catch it. And then there's a machine gun that's shooting the cereal into the bowl. And then the eggs are being shot into the pan, and the shells just bounce right out of the pan. And then the flames on the stove are like super hot and high. And this is his like obstacle course to get breakfast because it helps him stay in shape. And that's just kind of how Darkwing's life is things are supposed to be normal and they are far, far from normal.
That was probably one of my favorite callbacks in the whole story.
that was enjoyable. So off to school, Goslin has to go. Morgana packs a lunch for her, but then she forgets to pack her dessert, so she casts a spell, but it goes awry and actually turns Goslin's friend Honker into chocolate pudding. So then Honker is pretty much chocolate pudding for the rest of this issue, and I think the next one too.
Yeah,
so we keep that for a little bit. So meanwhile, we have Drake, who's having trouble letting go of his Darkwing memorabilia because, you know, he has a whole room dedicated to action figures and coffee cups and all kinds of stuff with his face on them because he has a huge ego. So anyway, he's looking at all of these memories, and so he's talking about like how much vegetation that he's fought, and it's true, he has fought quite a bit of vegetation. But then they show this alternate reality version of him called Warrior Duck, which looks like the alternate Batman Thomas Wayne with the like red eyes from Flashpoint.
Yeah,
that was
hilarious.
kind of weird. So now that he's he's given up being Darkwing, he goes, I am the hero who helps at the elementary school community garden. So he goes off to school to help with that, but immediately gets homework assigned as a punishment for bringing untested inventions into the school. So he kind of got off a little easy there with homework, which is still weird because he's, 35-ish. But meanwhile, Bushroot is attacking the school and tying everyone up in vines. So, maybe we should call for help or something. So in issue 4, that at the beginning, this is, to be continued now. We get into issue 4 where Goslin finds Drake, who's mowing his lawn, doing normal people things, and says, help, we need help at the school. Bushroot is attacking. So Drake goes off to the school. He's really ineffective at fighting, even more so as Drake than as Darkwing. But when he slips into a garden shed, he decides that it's time to come out of retirement. So he brings Darkwing Duck back on the scene. He defeats Bushroot with something called an atomizer. And so it is not an atomizer, it is an atomizer, which transforms green vines into brown inert versions, in autumn. And so he uses this to subdue Bushroot, saving the school and bringing us kind of back to the status quo. After
it actually puts him to sleep, doesn't it? I think it makes Bushroot fall asleep.
So at the end of the issue, then we're watching as Drake uses the atomizer on his yard, so that way all the leaves fall and he doesn't have to mow anymore, and he doesn't have any more yard work to do because we know that mowing is really hard work. So
that's very true.
If you just make it autumn all year round, then you never have to mow.
I was thinking about that when I read that. I was like, oh my gosh.
So issue 5, and I know this is a really long summary, but just bear with us here. Issue 5, Darkwing, now not Drake, but Darkwing Duck, and Launchpad go to the spa. So why does he need to go to the spa as Darkwing? Because it's funny, I guess. But he ditches the hat, and he's got the purple bandana, but then he's got cucumber slices on top of the bandana on top of his eyes. So it's kind of snacks. Yeah, exactly. Tasty. So while they're swimming in a pool that has a statue of a dog as the fountain, the statue cracks open and Liquidator appears and wants to flush the old you down the drain and start over. So now we have to fight Liquidator. So Darkwing lures him into a subatomic freezer, which, naturally every spa has one of those.
Of course.
For freezing yourself to death. I don't really know. But he uses that and heroically freezes crime in its tracks. But he gets the sense something bigger is going on. And so in typical Darkwing fashion, he's going out there searching for clues, and we see clues just literally all over the place as to it's literally in your face what the problem is, but he can't see it because it's too obvious. So he finally figures out that it's the company. This company is actually they've got stores everywhere and they produce all these different kinds of products, and now they're going to buy the school apparently, because I guess that's something a corporation can do, and they're called the Nourishingly Organic Good, and then whatever the product is, if it's candy, if it's fruit, if it's whatever. And so nourishingly organic, or NO, and then good. So nourishingly organic good is NO good, or no good. So we figure out, well, this is no good. No good. No good. That's it. And so he figures out that the company is actually behind all these bad things happening. So he busts into the school during the takeover, like gym class on the day you forgot to wear deodorant. But the children are all too busy being mind controlled by the candy from the Nourishingly Organic Good candy store. That candy was definitely no good.
Agreed.
So Darkwing takes Goslin away from the school and tries to get through to her, and he finally says, "That's the spirit I so came to admire." And so the word spirit is what snaps Goslin out of this trance from the mind control. So that was another cool callback to the first episode.
Yeah.
So then issue 5 is to be continued, and we wrap things up in issue 6, where Darkwing actually teams up with Megavolt at first, who electrifies a local theme park to attract all the mind-controlling kids. So they're like, we need to go get Darkwing, but then they go, but let's take a ride in the amusement park first. So it's a nice distraction to get them off of Darkwing's case, but then actually it's a double cross. So while Darkwing is on the Ferris wheel, he gets trapped by Megavolt, who's actually in league with Dr. No Good as a part of F.O.W.L. So now he has to get rescued by Launchpad and Goslin, and then they follow Darkwing follows Dr. No Good into a house of mirrors, subdues him, but then he's confronted by Negaduck. Even Darkwing at this point is like, what is it with all these supposedly not alive or disappeared bad guys showing up all of a sudden? So we get a lot of bad guys in this story. So because F.O.W.L failed, Negaduck is there, and he puts the Fearsome Five back together. Megavolt, Bushroot, Liquidator, Quackerjack, and Negaduck makes 5. The Fearsome 5.
It's for Megavolt, Bushroot, Liquidator, Quackerjack, and Negaduck makes 5. The Fearsome 5.
But then the Justice Ducks arrive. Launchpad, Morgana, Stegmutt, Gizmoduck, and Neptunia, who's not a duck.
I'm not a duck.
But Stegmutt used to be.
I used to be.
So basically, the Justice Ducks get dangerous, and they subdue the Fearsome Five, and everything pretty much has a happy ending at this point.
Yeah.
So that pretty much sums up our story, so we'll take a short break, and we'll be right back to discuss.
All right.
Popular in the late 20th century, Darkwing Duck was the last and most unique of all mythological heroes. According to legend, he was a figure of great mystery, his true origin never revealed. We now know that the people who watched these exploits had much smaller brain pans than our own, which is no doubt the reason they became extinct.
We are back, and with action figures.
That's right.
Actually, these belong to my wife, but she has these cool little, tiny little figurines that are really neat.
I wonder if they were McDonald's toys or if they were just, just buy them as part of a pack. I don't know.
They were probably McDonald's toys. She has a lot of those.
They're pretty cool, though.
From her childhood, which is awesome.
So, Darkwing Duck is a spinoff of DuckTales, which was another popular Disney cartoon from this same era, although it was a little bit earlier. I think I looked it up, and it started in, 1987. But DuckTales was actually a spinoff of Donald Duck comics and cartoons from, the 1940s, where Scrooge McDuck actually was an antagonist, and he was not, a good person. It was... he was greedy, and he was kind of ruining Donald's life a lot of the time. So interesting that what we're looking at today is actually a spinoff of a spinoff.
Mm-hmm. And they're all cartoons.
Yeah, for sure. So this is, as far as long-running Disney franchises, this is probably one of the longest. Mm-hmm. If you trace it back to the original stuff, because I think the earliest cartoons were in the 40s. And we can talk about it more later, but the guy that created Donald Duck and the Duckverse, his name was Carl Barks. But because Walt Disney was who he was, he made Carl Barks work anonymously for 40 years and took the credit for creating them. So it wasn't until posthumously that we found out that this other guy actually drew and made all these comics. And so that's... Yeah, so us being 90s kids, we grew up with DuckTales and Darkwing Duck and weren't really aware of that older stuff. But it's all... A lot of it has kind of been around for a while, and I think Darkwing was kind of the logical, here's the next step, because they have Gizmoduck on DuckTales, right? And so he's kind of a superhero. And then I don't know whose idea it was, but it was cool that they were let's just do a superhero duck show, So
yeah, and ahead of the whole MCU superhero craze that we've seen in recent years, this was even before Blade and X-Men and everything too. So, so really this is the start of the whole superhero movement, because we don't consider the movies from the 80s and 90s that Marvel tried to do.
Not really, no. The TV movie Captain America and the Dolph Lundgren, the Punisher, and all that stuff. They're pretty
Ferrigno
weird.
is Hulk, and actually, I think the Flash series was actually pretty good though.
Was it from the 90s? I think it only ran for one season, but my understanding was that it was pretty good.
Yeah,
but yeah, this is really. It feels like just how the show came about was animators that were going, "Hey, we like superheroes, but we're working on these Disney projects. What can we do to kind of do something within that?" Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I like about Darkwing Duck just as a franchise is that it is goofy, it is silly, and Darkwing has his ego problems and his fatal character flaws, which is a very Marvel thing to do, to have the very flawed hero. Except that his problem is that he's kind of always showboating and trying to trying to show off for the cameras and become popular, and
but not
that.
always without substance.
Right.
It's not that he's completely inept. Sometimes he does things that are completely inept, but then once those pass and we get to the end, sometimes he will actually save the day heroically.
Yeah, it's a really good balance between like the comedy and the actual like, oh, he actually is competent. He does do something. And to this day,
he's just a big dork about it.
I don't. There might be an episode out there that explains this. I don't know. But it feels like he actually has the superpower of teleporting because he always appears in a cloud of smoke from like nowhere. And I don't know how he does that.
Yeah, I remember that. So there is an origin episode, but it's kind of like a weird retcon. It's kind of like Freakazoid, who sometimes you would see him like going down the street in like as a burst of lightning where he has super speed, and other times he's running down the street like a normal person going whoosh, whoosh.
So true.
And it's like, okay, wait a minute, is he super powered or not, or is he just an idiot? So it's kind of the same thing with Darkwing, where they actually do like they show him shooting out of his gas gun and a little pellet comes out and then it makes a cloud of gas and then he vacates.
Oh, okay.
But then there is an origin episode later where they show that he actually acquired this power to teleport in a puff of smoke.
Oh, okay.
So then from then on the series, I think they're kind of inconsistent with it. So it's like, it's one of those where when you have a serialized show that's, pre-2000 really,
yeah,
there are a lot of things that get left out or a lot of inconsistencies or a lot of retcons because they just weren't good at doing that back in that era of having something carry over, because if they did, then if you didn't see season 1, you'd be completely lost in season 2, and that just wasn't how TV was because it was so easy to miss an episode.
And especially not with kids' cartoons. I would say really where serialization started to come into kids' cartoons was there were two places, and it was like almost at the same time. You've got X-Men, the 97 show, which dared to do things like 8-part stories, which were insanely long. And this is, keep in mind, this did not air after school. It was every Saturday. So like you're not getting the next episode the next day. Mm-hmm. You're waiting like a week to see the next episode, like you would with some kind of serialized drama or like soap opera of the time. And then Gargoyles is the other show from this era that would have been really like, they got into heavy serialization where they were really concerned with keeping their continuity and making it make sense over a long period of time. But
Spider-Man did that too.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I guess Spider-Man did do that because they had, especially once they started to do the Clone Saga stuff towards the end of the show.
Well, even with like Alistair Smythe and the whole like Kingpin stuff going on, they and even with Venom, like they'd have these sagas. It's kind of more like, I think, Dragon Ball Z, where it's like you have the Saiyan saga, then the Frieza saga, and then the Cell saga. So Spider-Man was kind of more like that, where you had these like little mini stories that were serialized. So maybe not the entire show, but yeah, like a lot of those shows did that, where you kept, whereas like DuckTales, they would have these little things that they would carry forward that if you knew about it, then it would be like, oh, that's a really cool callback, but it wasn't important to the story that if you didn't know what it meant, you would just keep watching the episodic, something different happens every time.
Yeah, and I think Darkwing Duck was really similar, where they set up his origin episodes, by the way, are probably two of the best like animated pilot episodes that I've ever seen. They're really good at establishing like who everybody is, what the relationships are to each other, and they even actually, even though they show that he's kind of an idiot, they also show that he's competent at the same time,
right?
Which is really interesting because that's kind of like the through line for the whole show, is like he is a dork and he does have ego problems, but Saint Canard does still need him, and he actually is an effective superhero. So there's kind of that weird push.
He's just maybe not an efficient superhero.
No, he's not efficient. No.
It's like he'll get the job done, but he'll kind of muck things up a little bit here and there, and people will get captured and things will happen. But nobody ever actually gets killed because, it's a kid's cartoon, so we don't need to kill people. So, and even, in the comic with him interrupting that electrical signal with his body, like you see him being electrocuted, but then he just has like a little smoke coming out of his head and he's kind of like delirious for a couple panels and then he's fine.
Speaking of him getting injured in ways that should kill someone, in the Liquidator issue, after they're massaging him and they freeze him, one of the people comes up and like elbows him on top, and to like give him a massage after he's really cold, and he breaks into little ice cubes. And I was thinking, oh, is that Liquidator's plan to kill him? Is to like freeze him and break him into little ice cubes? But then he was fine in the next panel. It was just like an animated gag. So even that late in the story, I was still trying, like, having to keep remind myself, like, oh yeah, this is like cartoon logic where nobody's gonna get killed. We can see them get injured in like really humorous ways, but that's not going to be a thing. I thought maybe we'd have an issue where like Darkwing's frozen head would be hopping around and he'd have to like get back to his body or something, but they didn't get quite that wacky with it.
Yeah.
But I thought that, I mean, we know the cartoon really well, I would say. I can't quote specific episodes that much, but I had these 4 VHS tapes when I was a kid, and each of them had 2 episodes on it. And I watched those like over and over and over and over and over. And so the Justice Ducks Unite was one of them, where you get to see the Justice Ducks and like how that team formed. And you also see the Fearsome Five for the first time.
The Fearsome Five.
And there actually is some real peril in that episode towards the end when they're going to throw, we know, the switch.
The fun begins when I throw...
We know the switch.
To kill everybody. They're going to, like, drown Neptunia by depriving her of water, and I can't remember what they were doing to everybody else. I think Stegmutt was going to get crushed, and everybody had, like, a doomsday device that had been created to, like, destroy them specifically. So that was really a fun... kind of like the Justice League or the Avengers versus, their enemies team up episode. But I thought that this comic did a great job of just distilling the spirit of those cartoons.
Spirit.
Spirit. Thanks, Darkwing.
Yeah, exactly. Spirit. Into like a comic book form.
Yeah.
And which should be pretty easy because they're already animated characters, but really... I think that we found with stuff like Ratchet and Clank, which we reviewed like in our first year, that you can't, or it's not necessarily easy always to take something from one medium and translate it to another. So I actually was really happy with, how all that was done.
And think back to our Addams Family episode as well, where they literally took an episode of the cartoon and transcribed it right into the comic book. Like, we rated that super low too, because it's like this comic, to read it is not really that much fun, and knowing that this is animated somewhere, just go watch the animated version.
Right.
Like, it seemed like there was no reason for the comic to exist, and that sounds really harsh, but just from a critique standpoint, it was just kind of like, well, what are you reading? What are you getting from reading this versus watching the cartoon?
And why does it exist? Like, why make it if you have a product that does the same thing better out there?
Well, and that's one thing I was going to say too, is that even with something like Star Wars, I have picked up some Star Wars comics here and there, but I actually have had trouble getting into Star Wars comics because I'm just so used to seeing everything, either on the big screen or all the shows that they have going on. And to see a lightsaber battle, like, panel by panel, just doesn't excite me as much. Now novels, Star Wars novels are amazing. Like, I've read so many that I'm like, this is great. Like, reading is fun, stuff like that, because I guess there's more imagination and less on the page. Because like, I feel like on the page a lot of times, and maybe it's the artists will kind of give you like, they're giving you the panels of the story, but it's not as much like, it doesn't really show the same kind of action that you would see on the screen. Because like with, what was it? Was it Sonic that we read where the motion was just like carried forward? I was like, this is great. Like, watching Sonic in a game is cool and he's very animated, but reading this comic, he also feels very animated here. So that was one of the good examples of being able to do that. And I think this is one too, where it's like, it's fun, it's funny, you get the same hijinks that you would in a cartoon. It's just, in the story format, it works.
Yeah, there were multiple times that I was just sitting on the couch reading while my girlfriend was reading something else, and there were multiple times that I would like chuckle out loud or be like,
"What you laughing at?"
And then tell her like, "Well, you see, Darkwing just did this incredibly alliterative thing where he's like, I'm pondering the place of the pawns of the put, and it just went on and on and on, and I'm like, and I can hear it in Jim Cummings' voice because it's so in character for him. So
yeah,
as far as like the writing of this, like it was excellent. All the characters seemed like themselves. Goslin especially as well. Like I could really hear her with her like keen gear and and all that kind of thing. I really generally thought that everybody was in character, and there weren't any moments where I was like, hey, Darkwing wouldn't say that or anything like that. So,
and I don't remember seeing anything that was like kind of like shocking or jarring that would take you out of it. There weren't any poses or anybody's faces like with Knuckles where he's just like, but I don't remember seeing anything that stuck out that I was like, ooh, this doesn't quite fit. Like, I think the whole thing was pretty consistent.
Yeah, the art is really consistent. So only because I guess I have a really trained eye for stuff like this because I wrote a lot of comics. I draw. I've done some art school. I didn't finish, so I can't claim to have an art degree. But I did take a lot of art history courses. I did notice one thing in the first couple issues that I'm going to call the JRJR effect that Carlo Lauro was doing. And that is a lot of up-close panels of characters with expressions with no background and just a gradient behind them. So John Romita Jr. has said a lot of times, my drawing style, if you ask me to describe it, is I have to make a deadline. And so he's been criticized in a lot of his modern stuff for not drawing backgrounds and just doing that a lot where there's just a color gradient behind and things like that. So I did pick out a lot of instances of that in the early story, but it actually got to be less and less as we went on, where there were more and more backgrounds and things like that. And so it's not a big deal. It didn't ruin the story for me. It was just something that jumped out to me a little bit where I was like, oh, that's kind of like a hack for like you need to get it done. But also, come to find out when I did research that this artist is also doing another monthly book at the same time called The Young Adventures of Donald. So he's penciling 2 books simultaneously.
Okay.
So if he has to like cut a couple corners here and there, like I'm not surprised because that's a pretty heavy workload for a comic book artist. But one thing, so that's the only negative thing I noticed. The positives were much more. Every character is on model. The cartoony stuff was really cartoony. Like it looked like it was, something out of the animated show. Where like when Darkwing is getting his massage, his arms are stretched out like super long while they're like cracking his bones and stuff to like give him the chiropractic treatment. And all the visual gags like him turning into ice cubes and even just the weird stuff like him having this flotation device that also works as like a restraining device that he throws on Quackerjack. Like all of that stuff looked great. It looked straight out of the cartoon, and maybe in some instances better, because with cartoons you have different animation teams where maybe this is the one that we go to and we just have to get the episode out quick. And if you're watching a cartoon or like binging it on Disney Plus or wherever, you'll notice whenever like an animation team switches. It's really obvious. But because this had one penciler all the way through, it was really consistent.
Yeah.
So that was super nice. And then the other thing that I noticed about the art that was hilarious is if you look at the sound effects throughout the whole thing, none of them are normal. They're all, instead of it saying like splurt when something gets like squirted like water, it says quacker splurt. And there's one point where Darkwing like ties his rope around the top of the thunderquack and it says duck tug instead of tug. So all of the sound effects are like unique to the Duckverse basically, and I thought that was a really nice, funny touch. So
yeah, it's kind of like the old comics that were like boom, pow, biff, but it's like cartoonized as well.
Yeah, it was very funny to just like, we'll put the sound effects in that world too. So
that's neat. Yeah, I guess I didn't pick up on that. But But I was glad that, we didn't see where they were just copying what was from the animated series.
No.
Like, I didn't see anything that was like, this looks like a recreated panel, or this one panel looks different because it's a sketch of a frame, whereas the rest of it is different. Like, it had its own kind of unique style that fit the world of Darkwing Duck and felt consistent, but didn't feel like forced or artificial or weird. Although some of the variant covers were kind of interesting.
So on that note, in the back, the first issue, Dynamite is all in on Darkwing Duck, by the way. They're cashing in all their chips on it. There were 33 variant covers for issue 1. That is insane to have that many variant covers. I know it's a new number 1, but like, wow.
Yeah.
Dynamite really, because all those artists have to be paid. And you get into things like, this is a retailer variant where the retailer has to order 25 copies to get one of this one, and so then you can mark up the price and all that kind of stuff. But 33 is like, that's a lot. I think even when the Fantastic Four were coming back, after they'd been gone for like who knows how many years from Marvel, I don't think they even did that many variants for them. And they did a lot. I mean, it was probably 20 or so, but
wow.
Yeah, 33 is like a crazy number. So
Yeah, and it's cool that you get to see all of them in the trade as well,
Yeah.
and just kind of look through and be like, well, that one's interesting. Well, that one's weird. Oh, that's kind of cool. Whoa, they look like little children with huge eyes.
Yeah, there was one of the later issues where the cover was that way, but of course because it's just the cover, you don't it doesn't really bother.
Yeah,
you.
no,
It's not
You just
breaking
kind
up
of
the
flip through and
story.
kind of like check them out as you go.
At first, I was like, why did they not give each variant cover a whole page to itself? Until I realized how many there were, and that it would add like way more book to the book. So I guess they couldn't really do that.
Yeah.
Not cheaply anyway.
Yeah.
So there was a little bit of character development in this story, although I would hesitate to say that there was a lot of strong character development. But we did have Darkwing trying to hang up the cape, which I know from talking to you before is one of those superhero tropes that you don't like.
Yeah. It wasn't so much in this one because like he started to do it, but it was like for his family. But then we all knew that he was going to be Darkwing again,
Right.
the first sign of trouble. So it was just a little bit different because it wasn't as serious as a lot of those tend to be, and
Yeah.
it didn't feel as arbitrary either. It's like, hey, I'm inventing some tech to protect the city, so I'm going to stop fighting crime. Like, well, hold on a second. Let's make sure your tech actually works first before you hang up the cape. Oh, don't worry, I didn't hang up the cape. I'm still using it anyway. Well, then why are you quitting?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm talking about our Steel episode.
Yeah.
But
I mean, but like even Iron Man 3, like the movie where he he decides like oh, I've been defeated, I shouldn't be Iron Man anymore, and it's like do we have to go through another one of these stories where it's like, what are you without the suit, and you have to discover who you are without the suit? And it's like, well, yes, if you're a person in the real world, that's important, but in a comic book movie, you went to see the suit, so you're kind of like, all right, let's get.
We don't care who you are without the suit. We want to see the suit.
We want to see the superhero stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
I was glad that didn't last too long in this either.
It's just one of those things that like you talk about superhero tropes, and it's
Yeah.
like, does every superhero have to have this moment? Does every superhero have to go through this particular event? And sometimes it just can be kind of like repetitive. But I think with Darkwing, it was like it made sense, and it was funny, and it was short lived anyway, so it was fine because he wants to be with his family, and he just wants to take care of Goslin, and he thinks that it will keep her out of danger if he's no longer Darkwing, because Darkwing attracts danger and she's always in the thick of things. But the real reason is because danger apparently just lurks everywhere in St. Canard anyway. And Darkwing is at least putting a stop to it. And Goslin actually helps and should be a sidekick. So really it's making things worse by not being Darkwing. But, that's what we'll get that from the story. So it's fine. It's funny. It doesn't cause any problems.
It didn't really bother me either. When he first said it, I was kind of thinking like, oh man, I hope this isn't like the rest of the trade, but it was like literally half of an issue.
Yeah.
Before he decided like, and I mean, it's his ego among other things, but it's also just I don't know, for some of these superhero stories, sometimes it makes them look dumb to assume that in a world with all of these like gods and monsters flying around, that you could just step away from it and be like, well, it'll be fine. It's like, no, what you're doing is probably necessary. Like this is not like our normal world that you exist in. Like there are threats from like the multiverse and all kinds of things. So
well, it was funny to see Darkwing's take on it, though, because, like you mentioned, his ego. And it's funny because, like, he has a whole room that's just dedicated to memorabilia and memories and things that he's done and action figures. And, like, he sees the action figures at the toy store of himself. And he's just like, ooh, like, he's his own biggest fan. So you'd think that, like, he would be a little bit sad giving up his cape because then he doesn't get to pose for the pictures anymore.
Yeah.
Get my good side. Oh, wait, they're both my good side.
Your ego is out of control, isn't it?
What?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. It did make me wonder, why has he never in like the animated series ever had the moment of going, you know, maybe this isn't safe for my daughter? Because that does seem like something maybe he should have thought of a long time ago. So, because, you know, literally every episode, Gosling is in the thick of stuff with him. So, you know, but she's got spirit, as we say, and she's also
spirit.
Spirit. Mwah. Thanks, Darkwing.
She's also really competitive and athletic and.
This is some kind of training course, huh?
That was amazing. It's not at my level, of course, but that's still pretty impressive.
She has all of these qualities that sort of like help him through his adventures, and a lot of times she has the ability to, you know, see through maybe somebody's appealing to his ego, and you know, Gosling can be like, I don't think that makes sense. Like, you know, I don't think they're telling you the truth or whatever. So he does kind of need her. I did think that it was awesome that when she became sort of a full-fledged sidekick at the end, she got like this Green Arrow.
Oh yeah,
outfit,
that was awesome.
Where she has like this green mask and a green cape, and she's like shooting arrows. She shot like a toilet plunger at Megavolt to like ground him so that the rubber would keep his electricity from getting out or whatever. That was hilarious.
Yeah, that was fun. I enjoyed that.
And then, I mean, it's interesting that Launchpad immediately left, too, because I guess he just defines himself as a sidekick, and if he can't be that, he's like, well, I have to find another place to be a sidekick. I don't know. So it was really just a plot device to get us to Morgana's family, I guess, but...
or just to include him in the story, because we could have just not seen him, which I don't think we saw like a huge amount of him anyway. I think the most we saw was Gosling and Honker tagging along.
Yeah. Honker is you kind of feel bad for that kid because like he really didn't ask for any of this, but he always has terrible things happen to him.
He kind of reminds me of Butters from South Park, where it's like he hangs out with Cartman, and that's the problem because Cartman gets him into trouble all the time. That's kind of like Honker, where it's like he's just trying to be a good friend, but then he gets into trouble with Gosling, and his parents are like, "What are you doing?" And he's like,
Yeah, he's kind of got like a snotty nose like accent, doesn't he? Like he sounds congested a lot, if I remember right.
Well, there's this
Honker?
Spit it out!
a lady jumped out of a panic, then she painted a door with this glass and took the snatch you back of that picture.
They're like canaries or something, or parakeets.
Yeah, something like
with
that.
the beak that's like tucked over in the front.
Right. So he has a little bit of a speech impediment thing, but. It was fun to see them getting into trouble, too. They even... Well, I mean, the reason they get captured in the first issue is because Gosling's like, let's form a band. And I showed the picture to my girlfriend about where Gosling was in the band, and she's like, oh my gosh, her hair is styled and colored to look like Billie Eilish.
Oh, nice.
The pop star. So there were a lot of things like that like if you're a modern kid reading this, you would notice nods to like modern things. But... you know, us being longtime fans, we may not necessarily pick up on that, but we can still enjoy the story too, just because the characters are so much fun.
Right.
So, I did think it was interesting that they chose to bring it into the modern era. That actually was, I mean, of the things that surprised me, that surprised me the most, oddly enough. I don't know why I didn't expect to see any cell phones, but when they first pulled one out, I was like, oh yeah, This is taking place now.
Yeah.
Because in my memories, Darkwing Duck is in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So I was reading this going like, it's the 90s. And then when they got to that moment, I was like, oh, it's modern. And I kind of had to like adjust to that a little bit. Not that it was jarring. I just wasn't expecting it so much.
Yeah.
So...
Well, and like the technology of the day is not necessarily something that's always integral to the story.
Right.
But it was in this one because Megavolt was literally controlling people through their cell phones. So it was kind of like a funny, like, not only are we showing that this is more modernized and we have cell phones, but it's actually like relevant to the plot.
Right.
And then also Darkwing's kind of old school mentality of like, well, you don't need a cell phone if you're a kid, then... You know, that actually saves Goslin from being, you know, in with everybody else who's getting controlled by their phones.
I
So
wonder
it's
why Honker didn't have one either. I
I
guess
don't
his
know.
parents feel the same way. I guess there's not much else to say about like the heroic characters. Did you have a favorite of like the villains as far as those go? I mean, we didn't spend a whole lot of time with each one.
Yeah. I would say it'd be a toss-up between like Negaduck or Megavolt. I've always liked Megavolt just because he's such a weird, like he's such a serious-looking villain, but then he's like in love with a Hadron Collider, and he thinks toasters need to be, you know, free and all this kinds of stuff. So he's like clearly demented.
You are not a well person.
What? And you're normal? I am the cold sore that stings your lip? We are definitely talking demented.
But then he's got a battery on his back, and so he's so easily defeatable if you just toss a little bit of water on him or put, you know, a plunger on the back of his head. And his hat is like an electrical plug with both the prongs.
It's a really good design.
Yeah, like just the character design and the voice and the character and his weird like love for electrical machinery and things like that.
Oh, thank you, little light. Would you like to come live with me?
Oh, that would be very nice.
I think he's such a quirky and fun villain.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun. If I had to pick an actual arch nemesis for Darkwing, based on the cartoon, I think I would say it's Megavolt, not Negaduck, only because Negaduck doesn't really show up that much.
Yeah.
I feel like he's one of those characters that they pull out when it's like, oh, stuff is really serious now, but Megavolt, I feel like, is more the one that's kind of menacing him on a regular basis. So,
Yeah.
So at least I remember more episodes with him. So seeing him in the comic book was kind of like, okay, this is a must. Like, we need to see him. I will say I really enjoy Liquidator, just because the fact that he's always doing a sales pitch while he's trying to kill you is hilarious.
Serving the public, getting you down? Tired of staring at the station house walls? Then engage in life-threatening combat with Bushroot and the Liquidator.
He's honestly like a pretty scary villain if you think about what his powers are and what he can actually do. So it's pretty hard to hurt him, and I actually read on the wiki that he can control his own density as well, so he can choose if stuff passes through him or not. So that's like, wow, that it almost seems like they should have done more with him. I don't know, but Darkwing does look like an idiot because there's a giant statue in the massage place that looks exactly like Liquidator, and then they're surprised when he comes out. So,
it's a spa day. They're relaxing. They're thinking about what they're going to do in the subatomic chamber later, I guess.
I guess, yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. I find him a lot of fun. Negaduck wasn't really in the story a whole lot. Except at the very end to kind of be like, oh, he's been the one behind it all along. I don't know. I mean, he was there.
Yeah.
I did notice more like weird trivia. When I was doing research, I also found out, so the original appearance of Negaduck is the actual split from Darkwing's body.
I really must take up something safer than crime fighting, like embroidery or ceramics.
I gotta take up something more profitable than crime fighting, like shaking down Girl Scouts for their cookie money.
And then he gets galvanized.
Galvanized!
And he's like super evil Negaduck or whatever, with like all the energy pulsing through him, and he's just destroying things.
I am the most fiendish terror that flaps in the darkest night. I am the skunk that pollutes your air. I am
So that character was apparently a one-off that does get destroyed at the end of that episode. And then there's another Negaduck.
You, Darkwing Duck, have traveled through the doorway that separates your world from ours and entered the Negaverse. Here, everything is the opposite of your universe, and Negaduck rules supreme.
Well, he's like Reverse Flash, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
basically what he
Yep.
is. I mean, even down to like his color scheme, which I wouldn't have realized at the time. But yeah, apparently he's like a distinct character from the one that was like an energy being. So
okay.
Didn't know
well,
that.
there is another Negaduck that gets created on the more modern DuckTales show. Like they actually in the last season they have like a little Darkwing Duck, a couple of episodes. Jim Cummings reprises his role, but they do create a new Negaduck as kind of a cliffhanger.
They want grim and gritty, huh? Happy to play the part.
But then they never come back and revisit it, and that was very sad. I hope that they have some kind of either Darkwing Duck or spin-off, because they had a guy who looked just like Drake Mallard.
Drake Mallard? Never heard of you.
And it had a different voice actor, but I think he was hired to play Darkwing in like a movie that they were making.
The movie's ruined. I lost my big break. My hero tried to kill me, and I blew him up. Oh, what am I going to do now?
And so, of course, the real Darkwing took offense to this because, his ego is legendary and no one else could be like him. But the guy that they hired that looked like Drake Mallard, who had a different voice actor, it kind of seemed like there was a push to this would be the person to pass the torch to kind of thing.
Sure.
You could do this for real.
What, be a superhero? I mean, sure, I'm scrappy, I'm brave, I look great in the cape. I don't know. This whole thing sounds like it could get...
dangerous?
Yeah.
So it was like, okay, we might be able to get some Darkwing Duck just in a little bit different form because the DuckTales show that they did a couple of years ago was like really good. It was hilarious and the animation was good and everything, but they didn't really go anywhere with it from there. So maybe if the comics do well, we'll see some more in the animated department too.
Yeah, that would be really great. There are a lot of callbacks to the show, honestly, as well. Like that was something that I thought they did really well. I mean, even when you were doing your synopsis, I was just remembering, oh yeah, like the whole obstacle course with his with making his breakfast, although he's gotten better because he doesn't get smashed by the fridge at the end.
He doesn't get burned by the fire.
Yeah, so he actually, he's gotten really good at his breakfast training, I guess. So that was kind of cool because if you know the show, you've kind of like seen that progression of him moving along a little bit. And I'm trying to think if there were other callbacks that I noticed. I mean, obviously just bringing back old villains. Dr. No Good was a deep cut for sure. Like I did not know that he existed, but whenever Darkwing was like, "Oh, I know who this is," I was like, "Really? Did he show up somewhere?" And apparently he did. It was just DuckTales. It wasn't Darkwing Duck. So something that irks me with a lot of modern Star Trek is sometimes I think they try to rely on making references instead of writing a good story. It's like, look at all these references, and that's supposed to distract you from the fact that like the story that they're telling is maybe not that exciting on a lot of new Trek. Did you feel that way about this, or did you feel like the story was original enough to warrant kind of existing on its own?
Yeah, I think the callbacks were a part of the story or something that we kind of did as an aside, but it wasn't the main driving force for the story. So I think that it was cool to, again, have something that you can pick up fresh, not getting those callbacks, and just be like, oh, that's funny, versus, oh, that's funny, and oh, I remember the episode that, I saw that in originally and it was hilarious. So you get it either way, but it's a cool way to sort of pay homage to something versus, we're just rehashing an old episode that we've done before.
Yeah, I thought it was done really well. As far as, I think if you notice it and you're a fan, then it's there for you. And if you don't notice it, it doesn't affect the story in any way. Maybe the moment with Gosling being snapped out by him saying spirit, you wouldn't have had the context for that necessarily, but that's not like such a massive story point that you'd be like, what happened? It's not that big of a deal. So I thought that I was actually really impressed with Amanda Deibert's just knowledge of the cartoon and how much of that it felt like they put into this comic book. So,
well, we'll find more out about that and her, the writer, during our after show. So make sure you check us out on YouTube after you're done listening to this episode, because it's an after show, so it happens after the show.
Exactly.
So keep listening.
So don't listen to it before this show.
Right. It's an after show.
Of course, if you're listening to this already, then you're not listening to that before the show.
Is this now, or is this now later?
Unless you're listening to it later, in which case you did do it out of order.
Ah, my head hurts. Do you have anything else before we go into final thoughts?
No, I think that's good.
All right, we'll be right back with our final thoughts and ratings.
We like Darkwing Duck because they have the ball.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed this, and I'm a little bit torn because I can't really find anything wrong with it, but it feels weird to give a 5 to something that is really mostly there for comedic value and nostalgia and that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm going to give it a 4.5. I think that there's technically really nothing wrong with it. Even the minor gripe that I had about phoning it in on a couple of the backgrounds really doesn't bother me once I start getting into the story and getting swept up in the adventures. And honestly, it was just so enjoyable to see all of these characters again, to see more adventures with them. And it takes me back to like a simpler time in my life when all I had to worry about was what cartoon I was going to watch when I got home from school and you know what snack I was going to pick. So it was just really a lot of fun reading through this, and it's honestly a really quick read. It's 6 issues, but I don't want to say that there's not a lot of dialogue, but there's a lot of like visual gags and stuff that will kind of move the story along, and so the pace is still kind of that animation or cartoon pace that you would experience. Even down to the story structure, I really liked and thought that they implemented it well. We've got basically 6 distinct episodes, but once you get to the end, you realize that there have been threads that were carried throughout. And I think that's a good way to keep the spirit of the animated series, but still kind of have a little modernity of, okay, we're actually going to have a little more of an overarching story, you know, which is something that we do a lot more now. So, yeah, I think a 4.5 out of me. There's not really that much that I can say about it because I liked it so much. So, yeah.
All I can say is I liked it, and here's my score.
I mean, that's pretty much where I'm at.
Well, out of 5 bananas, I think I will give this one a 5 because of everything that you said, but also with the added that, you know, these are the first 6 issues of a story that's come back after we haven't had a Darkwing comic in however long, and even those were either parts of other stories or they weren't written for a either modern or our age audience.
Right.
So that makes me like it even more that now this one is written for fans of the show, but it still seems like it's easily accessible for people who maybe haven't watched all of the show or maybe are just familiar with it enough to know that it exists. And with everything going on with superheroes today, I think that it's even more accessible because when you see Darkwing switch from Darkwing to Drake Mallard, and then he's talking about giving up his cape, that's something that's kind of, I think, familiar to people who've at least seen one superhero movie and maybe are picking up this comic. So I feel like there's a lot in this that makes it accessible to a lot of different groups. And the storytelling is good, and the artwork is good, and it's fun, and it calls back to the show without regurgitating the same material. And I think it hit all of the notes perfectly for me that I would give it a 5. And there's more coming too. Like there's 6 more issues after this, and then there's like I think 3 more volumes that are coming out in the next several months of the trade.
There's a Justice Ducks mini that I know is gonna be collected in trade soon. There's actually a Negaduck mini that they're gonna be releasing as well. So Dynamite is really like they're putting money into giving this property kind of the love and respect that it deserves. And I'm just so happy that they found a writer and an artist that were able to pull off something this professional and this well that, like you said, appeals to so many groups. In a lot of ways, Darkwing Duck was kind of ahead of its time in that it's taking apart and making jokes about the superhero genre, which, yes, it had been around for, you know, a lot of years in comic books at this time, but in animation we hadn't seen nearly as much stuff. Same thing with like The Tick. I think if that were a new show today, it would find its audience a lot more than it did back in the 90s when, people weren't as familiar with the superhero tropes that they were kind of making fun of. So, yeah, it's aged well, and it's just really well implemented.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. All right, well, that is a wrap on our review of Darkwing Duck Foul Play. And there are more of these, like we said, coming out. So if you're interested in this and you like it, you should definitely check out more, because now seems like a good time to jump on the Darkwing bandwagon. And like I said, maybe, if this gains enough popularity that we could have like another animated series or a movie or a video game or something really cool that we can immerse ourselves in this world once again. And, for us, it's nostalgia mixed with, we really did enjoy this character. Like, if you go back and watch the episodes now, they'll feel a little dated. They'll feel a little slow. They might feel a little goofy. And there's a lot more variety of some episodes being more serious and more fun, and some episodes being very cartoony and just very, like, really, really, really goofy. So there's a broad spectrum there, but the comic is very much on the, I wouldn't say serious side, but definitely more kind of in the middle of we have some serious and we have some goofy, but it's not outrageous or too serious at the same time.
Yeah, I think that they kind of straddled that line perfectly.
Yeah.
As far as, like, some of the more goofy episodes of the cartoon, sometimes I was wishing, like, but I'd really like to see Darkwing actually succeed at something and not screw it up, And so this comic felt like it was hitting that a little bit more, where I'm like, yeah, I am rooting for Darkwing because he is a great hero, and yes, he has ego problems, and yes, he does screw up, but like he's still cool. Dang it, So I felt like that really came through.
It did. I think so. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode of We Like Comics Because They Have No Bones. Make sure you rate us on your podcast platform of choice, and also comment, like, and subscribe on YouTube. And be sure to check out our after shows where the discussion continues.
And don't forget to tell us what you think of this comic by posting on social media at Boneless Comics Podcast, or on X at Boneless Comics 1 using the hashtag Boneless Comics Podcast for all your questions and comments. And the truth is out there for our next episode, where we discuss the X-Files Season 10, Volume 5, which collects issues number 21 to 25, written by Joe Harris with art by Matthew Dow Smith, and published by IDW.
I want to believe on the next episode. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you later. Don't forget to check out our after show.
That's right.
We like Darkwing Duck because they